Okay, we're gonna do an exercise. Turn it over on the blank side. Turn it sideways. And don't draw anything until I go back to go, okay? And I'm going to talk through what we're going to do, and then we'll do it step by step. This is so much fun. We're going to draw an old-time train locomotive engine. Okay? And so I said don't start. We're going to draw a square. It needs to be kind of oblong. And the square is going to have two lines coming down and two lines going across. Okay, so that's going to be the body. And then however big your top square is, we're going to do a square on the top on that side, which is going to be the engineer's cab. And then on the bottom left, we're going to do another square that's the same size as the one above it. So we're just going to do this. It'll have two lines this way, two lines this way. However big your right-hand square is, we're going to put it up top. However your bottom left-hand square is, we're going to put it on bottom. Then we're going to put a cow catcher on the front, and then a smokestack. Now, draw the square, knowing that you're going to need to have space to double on both sides on the top and the bottom. Okay? Did you get a piece of paper? Do we have an extra one somewhere? Going to do a square, more of a rectangle. Let's do a rectangle. It's going to have two lines coming down. It's going to have two lines going across, roughly equal size. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we got kind of more of a help what's good, a little more of a rectangle. We're going to divide it into two lines down, two lines across. Now, move up to the top right-hand side, and however big your top right-hand square is, repeat that up on the top, and that's going to be the engineer's cab. All right. Then down on your bottom left-hand square, do one the same size underneath your bottom left-hand square, the same size as the one above it. So if you see we got a big square up here, a square here outside of the rectangle. Okay. Now at the very front, do a cow catcher that comes down and attaches to that bottom square that's by itself. Cow catcher.
Only on the bottom square?
On the bottom square, out front to catch the cows if they're on the track. Again, we're an old-time locomotive. And then up in the upper left, do some kind of a smokestack. You know, kind of something like this where steam or whatever will come out of a steam locomotive.
Jimmy's copying off me.
And then in the bottom middle and the bottom right-hand side, we want two wheels. Because you should have a bottom square on your left-hand side and then scoot over and do two wheels there. I will eventually give you something, but this is just a good exercise. I'm coming back from Dallas and I'm trying to explain to a Hispanic guy who's going to do something for us at church how I want these railroad ties, and I drove 50 miles trying to explain what we wanted, and he still didn't know after 50 miles. And there's something, we'll talk about this in a little bit, there's always something very interesting when we can't actually see something. After you've seen this will be so much easier, but I want you to have that experience of doing that before we start. Now, turn over. What we're going to do tonight was originally designed for 8 to 10-year-old little boys. Dear friends growing up, anybody know the Sykes family? They all go to York. Stedden. There were 11 children. All the boys are ST, Stevie, Stacy, Stedden, Stewart, and then all the girls are SH, Shauna, Shelley, Sharina, Charla. And so they had 11 of their own, adopted 2. And while I knew them, they ran Westview Boys Home. And while they had help with cottages, they typically had 85 boys in Westview Boys Home. So Hollis is kind of west of Altus. Their house, literally, the east side of their house was in Oklahoma and the west side of their house was in Texas. So that was where they lived. And you could not go to sleep on Saturday night until there were 13 pair of shoes with socks in them in order of size before anybody went to bed, because you would never find 13 pairs of shoes and socks on Sunday morning. And so that was just a part of this. And they got to thinking, if we have boys, and in a boys' home, you fill in the blank. Some will be orphans, some will be abandoned, some will be abused. If we have him for 8 months or till he turns 18, what's the most important thing we can do? And they decided, we're going to do our best to teach them the life of Christ while we have them. And whatever they do the rest of their life, they'll have to decide. But the single most important thing we can do is to teach them the details about the life of Christ. And so most little guys would relate to a train. And as we go through this is just one of the most clever things. I love people who have this kind of creativity. I don't. But they're going to do the chronology of the life of Christ on this train. Now, hopefully, if you're able to stay with us, by the time that we finish, over the next few weeks, you'll be able to place nearly every parable, every miracle, and every discourse within the season and the year that it took place. Now, there's several of these, and this one is a English translation by Kurt Olland. And these synoptic gospel things are so helpful. And they looked at a whole bunch of these, but then what they tried to do was, and there's always some guesswork, some speculation, but at the same time, there are some markers to help us to put some things in order, and most of them are going to come from the Gospel of John. But I wanted to start with this. When you look at the feasts that we have, and these are not going to be in order as we're going to talk about them, but let's go ahead and leave them here. Every week is the Sabbath, and this was designated as a day for Sabbath rest to cease from labor. And monthly, there's a new moon. And there was a new moon festival, the blowing of trumpets. Then here are the annual feasts. And I wanted to do this on the Jewish calendar, not on ours. And we'll kind of turn this around here in just a little bit. October 1st and 2nd in the Jewish calendar is like January the 1st. Okay? So your beginning of the Jewish New Year is going to be October 1st and 2nd. Then notice what happens in October. October the 10th is the day of, and this is dangerous to do with English and biblical words, but it's still true. October the 10th is the day of Et One Month. Only one time a year was the high priest allowed to go into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. And this is the only F-A-S-T, fast, of the Jewish calendar. Now, by the time of the New Testament, the Pharisees are going to add a whole bunch of others, but we're just talking about the biblical calendar. October the 10th is the Day of Atonement. And again, this happens after the beginning of your Jewish year. As we come closer to the New Testament, and I'll just do these two real quickly. What happens if the poor guy gets confused when he's in the Holy of Holies and God strikes him down or something? So they would keep him up most of the night before, reading the book of Leviticus to him to make sure he had the guidelines down for what he was supposed to do. I'm sorry, if you're 80 or 90, reading to me the book of Leviticus all through the night before is not going to help me to be clearer in thinking. And not in the Old Testament, but Intertestament. What if the poor guy has a stroke while he's in there and can't come out? We'll tie a rope around his ankle while he goes in, and he's going to offer sacrifices for himself, his family. He's going to offer sacrifice for the people, take the blood into the Holy of Holies. But see, if he has a stroke, we can't go in till the next year, so we'll tie a rope around his ankle, and if something happens to him, we can drag him out without going into the Holy of Holies. And so this is the day of Atonement, and again, the beginning of the Jewish New Year. Now, the equivalent of our Thanksgiving is going to be the Feast of Tabernacles, or booths or ingathering. And this is, can I use the term fall festival? Everybody know what I'm trying to say? It's the autumn time. We've got everything brought in. The crops are done. It's always amazing to me every year when the wheat harvest starts down in Texas, and some of these guys are going to go to Canada. And they just make that run all the way up that direction. Dad always had about 300 acres of wheat. And once the wheat turned that really golden yellow, you didn't do anything else until you got the wheat crop in. Because it could be either a hailstorm or too much rain, and it just ends up, I tell you, feeling sick, go out and all the wheat is literally on the ground, and the heads get shelled when they get ripe. And so everything was put on hold until we get the wheat harvest in. Well, this is the same thing. 3 times a year, as we're going to see, the Jewish men are to go to Jerusalem, and each of them involve finishing a harvest of some kind or another. This one is the fall harvest. So whatever's being harvested in the fall, and I'm sure there's some kind of apples and grapes and fruits and vineyard stuff, all these other things, but we're just going to work like Trojans, get the harvest in, and especially if we're up in Galilee, we're going to make the trip down to Jerusalem. And we're going to build these tabernacles, these booths, these shelters. And anybody been to a Boy Scout jamboree? It's fabulous. Campfires and tents, and it's an amazing time. And people are doing different projects and stuff. And they're going to camp out for a week, spend the week with relatives, worship, do these things. And this was, like I said, the equivalent of our Thanksgiving in our culture. December 25th is going to be important for us, and we'll see this in a little more detail. This is the feast of either dedication or lights. Today we know it as Hanukkah. And I'll talk about the details of this, but this happens in the Intertestament between 167 to 163, and I'll give you some more details on that later. The Feast of Purim, March the 15th, in the book of Esther. And I had a 4th grade teacher come to me, and she said, I read about this, and they would get together, and they'd started drinking before this started, and they would read the book of Esther, and half the people are going to cheer for Mordecai, and the other half are going to boo for Haman. She said, please tell me this didn't happen. And I said, if they've already been drinking beforehand, by the time they get through the book of Esther, and this was just a part of the observance of the deliverance that God's people had at the Feast of Purim. Now, very important for us, and these are going to be dates potentially in the life of Jesus, but the Passover and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread is going to be in April, and then the Feast of Pentecost is going to be 50 days later. You may not want to trouble your mind with doing this, but there are 2 places that the 3 feasts are given. There's others, but there's 2 places that the 3 feasts are given, and they are in the 2nd and the 3rd book Exodus, Leviticus, and they're in chapter 23. And so if you look in Exodus 23, Leviticus 23, then you'll see instructions about these three feasts, and these are required of the Jewish men. And each year, the men are to go, and let's leave it within our calendar year, they're to go to Passover, Pentecost, and Feast of Tabernacles and make that journey. If you look at number 4, and this is something that, again, is just a part of their life, and this will be much a part of the life of Jesus. The three feasts, the major ones, are also in conjunction with the agricultural year. Barley ripens quicker than wheat, and so Passover is going to happen typically after the barley harvest takes place. And then the guys are going to make the trip, if you're in Galilee, roughly 90 miles. And I'm not trying to be silly, but just think about this. Daryl, if you're on foot and you're going between here and Tulsa, how long is it going to take you to get to Tulsa on foot?
Not bad, maybe a year.
But this is a major thing. And they're going to go typically in groups. If you have the wife and the kids, it's going to be a whole different thing. So it's not only just the feast in Jerusalem, it's the trip back and forth. But before we go to Passover, the barley harvest is finished. While we're there and when we go back home, the wheat is ripening, and we'll try to get the wheat crop in and get that done. And then if we go back for Pentecost 50 days later, then we have finished the wheat harvest. Then in the fall, after the fall crops are in, then we have the Feast of Tabernacles. So I want to do these three on the bottom right quick, and then this will help us with where we're going to go. In the gospel train, there's going to be three different lines. As we're going to see, there's going to be the first one that you draw down, and this is going to be the Passover, roughly in April. And we remember the Passover with the sprinkling of the blood and the death of the death angel that caused all the people to die. And then the summertime is going to be the middle part of our train. And we're going to have, the next line is going to be the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths, which is going to be in October. And then the very end of our train is going to be the Feast of Dedication. So what I want you to start thinking about is that while we don't have any dates on any of the events in the gospel accounts, what we do have is that, and John does most of this, then we have these periods of times where, they went to this feast, they went to this feast, they went to this feast. And so anything that has to do with the dating of the life of Jesus is done because of the feasts. Now, if you're in the class that we did during the COVID, this will be a quick review, but only 7% of the Gospel of John is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Can I say it the other way? 93% of John is not in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke, typically they'll have, and especially Luke and Matthew, will have some about the early life. They'll do the Galilean ministry, and then he's going to come to Jerusalem, he's going to be crucified, and it's over. Where John is going to give us a whole series of feasts, and it's from John that then we have any idea about the time frame in the life of Jesus. And I'll go ahead and just tell you, John mentions three feasts specifically, and some people who do this very technically think there may have been another one. But let's just do one more on this very bottom. The Feast of Dedication, which is Hanukkah in the 25th, after the fall of the Persian Empire, the Greeks took over, and they were in charge of Palestine, and eventually the group from Assyria, from 198, took over from Egypt, and a series of rulers started, and his name was Antiochus Epiphanes, and he called himself the Bright One, and the Jews called him the Mad One. And Antiochus starts up in Syria and decides he's going to sneak down and take over Egypt and then control this whole area. And when he gets to Egypt, he is not aware of it, but there's already a Roman legion there. And the Roman general comes to him, takes his sword out, draws a circle in the sand, and says, in our vernacular, buddy, before you step out of this circle, you decide if you're going to go home or you're going to fight us. And he didn't know the Romans were there, so they made this long trip. So he's really ticked off. On the way back to Syria, out of his anger and also his frustration, he stops and offers a sow, a pig, on the altar in Jerusalem. And this sparked what is called the Maccabean Revolt. Mr. Maccabees and 5 sons are going to begin a guerrilla warfare. They were totally outnumbered. They nearly had no chance to win, but they did. And the desecration is going to take place maybe close to 167. And the dates either will be 64 or 164 or 163. On the 25th of December, they take over the temple again, and then they start cleansing the temple of the filth of having a pig offered on the altar. So when we come across the Feast of Dedication, Feast of Lights, Hanukkah, then this is intertestament, 167 to 163, and it celebrates we finally were able to take back the temple again and cleanse it. And they're going to have a brief 100-year self-rule, and it's either 66 or 63 BC. The Roman general Pompey comes in, and the guise of preventing a civil war, and the Romans never leave. So by the time of Jesus, the Romans had been there for a century, and there wasn't a major fight. They just come in and said, we're going to keep you guys from killing each other, and they just take over. So the frustration of having the Romans is a century old by the ministry of Jesus. But just before that, then December 25th, either 164 or 163, they're able to take the temple back, cleanse that, and that's a huge time of celebration because they were able to take that back together. If you look at the very, very bottom, and again, here's John 10:22. At that time, the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, okay? December 25th, Northern Hemisphere, it's winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. And so that just gives us some context for that. We're going to hand out a new round of papers, and we'll do this very quickly, but these will be the feasts that we have that will become a part of the dating. Like, for example, Jesus' family is going to go down for the Passover, and so the family can come a lot. Let's do it this way. If it's a group of 10, 20-year-old guys, they're going to go twice as fast as the family can go. And there are enough people traveling that they travel all day and don't see the boys. So there's not just there's a whole group. And again, there's safety. You have protection against robbers and other stuff. But I'm telling you, and that's what I say, if you just think between here and Tulsa, on foot, for most families, that gives you the context. And guys, we're supposed to be there 3 times a year. Can I say this respectfully? I don't know if we always want the wife and kids to go. I mean, yes, and do you ever know? That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But you know what I'm trying to say in terms of just getting there and getting back. More families, if they were going to go, would go for Passover if the family was going to go. And again, this translation is going to use the word festival, which I don't have any problem with that, but I like the word feast from the point of view. When this was kept as God gave it, 3 times a year, the guys have these, the travel part, and then when you get there, you're there typically mostly for a week. Some people, if they came from a long distance to Passover, would go ahead and stay in Jerusalem the 50 days till Pentecost before they made the journey home. The population in Jerusalem is just going to swell. And this is part of why Judas is so important. You would never find Jesus with the thousands of people camping out around Jerusalem without somebody like Judas to take you to where he was. The numbers are just staggering how many people are there. And then you think, Wayne, what if you and Kay live in Jerusalem? Every relative and friend you've ever known for your life is, hey, Wayne, can we come stay with you? And so you have this huge extended family type thing. Growing up, these were my grandfather's siblings. Typically, we would have 90 to 110 people for Thanksgiving every year. It's okay if it's at your house, all you need to do is either 4 hams and 5 turkeys, or 5 turkeys and 4 hams, and we'll bring everything else. And so 4 or 5 of us will go to the church building and get the tables and the chairs and everything else. But Thanksgiving with 110 people is just, it's a ball. Somewhere during that, we would stop and get out the songbooks and sing. And when we lived in Memphis, I told people, I like the turkey, I like all the rest of it, but I would gladly drive 700 miles to sing with my family. Because it was, and so that's what 3 times a year when these are kept, you have that type of thing going, and then you have this camaraderie in making the trip back and forth. And in the book of Psalms, when you come to, give me a second, it's Psalms 120 through close to 135. They're called the Songs of Ascent, and you are going eventually up to Jerusalem, and these are the songs that the pilgrims would sing while they're making the journey to Jerusalem, the Songs of Ascent. My mom's folks lived west of Mangum, a little place called Reed, and we milked 6 to 8 cows, and so we got all the chores done, all the things happened, and my dad wanted us to be pulling in the driveway when the sun came up. So we started probably at 4:30 for holidays and stuff when we went to that. But on the way, we would sing, over the river and through the woods, to grandmother's house we go, the horse knows the way. And that was just a part of our family song. And the majority of the time, we were in their front yard before the sun came up. But we had that song that we just sang as a family. Well, these songs from 120 on were the songs that the pilgrims sang when they were making this trip to go to Jerusalem. It just had to be, like I said, you whatever you want to think of, a jamboree, state fair, the mass of people who are there. But this is also the time, if we're going to try to get rid of Jesus, we have a lot of people who aren't in routine. We can get a lot of people stirred up, and this is going to be our best chance to get rid of him, as long as the people don't stone us because they know what we're doing. And that was also their prime opportunity to do that. We'll do this very quickly, and then we're going to take a short break, and be some odd cookies. We have some coffee on the make, a few things to drink, and then we'll jump in and head toward looking actually at the structure of the train. Here's festivals and feasts. Each year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival, the Feast of Passover. And then here we go, 12 years old. They went up to the festival according to the custom. And then later, after the feast was over, his parents were returning home. The boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. They're unaware of it. This is going to have to do with the dating of the ministry of Jesus. John will give us 3 Passovers by mention. And like I said, other people think there's actually a 4th Passover. We're just going to stick with these for what we're going to do. John chapter 2, 23. The ministry has started. We're going to have already turned the water into wine. While he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing, and they believed in his name. So John 2 is going to be the first Passover that's mentioned in the text. Everybody with me now? Then we find even as late as chapter 4, he goes back to Galilee. He's welcomed them. They had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, and they had been there. Now, in chapter 5 and verse 1, he does not tell us which one of these it is, but it still needs to be mentioned. He just says one of the Jewish feasts. So you can look at this later, and that's all John tells us, one of the Jewish feasts, and he gives us that detail. Then when you come to chapter 6, the second Passover is mentioned, and he says the Jewish Passover festival was near. Now, when you come to chapter 7, and this is very significant, the Festival of Tabernacles they lit candles and lights in the temple. And the Feast of Hanukkah is also sometimes called the Feast of Lights. But when you go from chapter 7 into chapter 8, most people feel like the discussion about I am the light of the world is going to be parallel with the things that happened during the Feast of Tabernacles with the lights that are in the temple. Jesus went about in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. Now let me stop. We know that we're at least 2 years into the ministry of Jesus in John 7 because we've already had 2 Passovers. Everybody begin to see what's going to start taking place with the flow of activity. So by the 2nd year, and Mark as early as chapter 2 tells us they're making plans to kill him. And so it's getting more and more dangerous for him even to go to Jerusalem. And so here we are. The brothers don't believe. Are you going to the festival? No, I'm not going. My time has not yet come. His brothers left for the festival, and then he's going to go later, not publicly, but in secret. The Jewish leaders were watching for him, and halfway through the Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus goes into the temple courts and began to teach. And on the greatest and the last day, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "Anyone who is thirsty, come to me and drink." And in this feast, there's the pouring of water and lights, and this is going to be a big part of John 7 and 8. When we come to John 10, then here is the one reference in the ministry of Jesus. And if I say Hanukkah, this is this Feast of Dedication that's going to be December 25th. So we know very specifically in John chapter 10 that in terms of the time of the year, we're at December the 25th. Then on the back page, here's the third, and this is the one that has to do with the crucifixion. They kept looking for Jesus. They stood in the temple courts. Do you think he's coming? And it says, the great crowd had come for the festival. They heard he was on his way to Jerusalem. Some Greeks were there. We're going to have the washing of the apostles' feet. And then you'll see just before the dotted line, Judas had charge of the money. Some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival to give to the poor. And so the events of the crucifixion are going to take place in the third Passover that John gives us in terms of just unfolding the narrative of the book. And so then all these things that take place, I'm under Last Supper, the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. It was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, and the custom is going to be there. And then I just mentioned those other things that are there. What I'd like to do, we're going to do 2 things. I'd like to pass out the next sheet. You guys mind getting some ice, and if anybody wants anything to drink? We have some tea, lemonade, there's some odd cookies. We're going to take 15 minutes, just kind of stretch and air out. But let's go ahead and pass the next one out, and then we'll take a short break, okay? Part of the reason why we're going through this is anticipating our study in the next quarter. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic's not the right word. Australians would say cheeky. If there's anything that members of the Church of Christ should excel at, in my opinion, it's the life of Jesus. Church of, if we were the Church of the Latter-day Saints, I could understand American history and Joseph Smith and Salt Lake City, but, we are a part of the Church of Christ. And so I just think this is something, I'm so excited we're doing this through the next year. And Lord willing, we'll probably sing this song at least once every night. But as you probably know, Fannie J. Crosby lost her sight at 6 months and was blind. And there's 1 or 2 exceptions, but in nearly every hymn that she writes, there is something about vision or sight. What is it in this song? Clearer than ever I see. Isn't that amazing that a blind person would be writing about sight. And it always just touches me when I, and most of us have had some experience of, temporarily being in the dark or something, but to be permanently blind is just hard for us to imagine. But you stop and think, these people's sense of hearing and smell and other senses are probably better than ours. But just as a part of her walk and her understanding, there's something about sight. And as we go through, we will obviously come to this, tell of the cross where they nailed him, writhing in anguish and pain. Tell of the grave where they laid him, tell how he liveth again. Love in that story so tender, clearer than ever I see. Stay, let me weep while you whisper, love paid the ransom for me. So, before we do the next handout, let me give you some description. And we'll be working off of this one. Everybody can see what the cowcatcher is. The cowcatcher is the pre-existence of Jesus in John 1. In the beginning was the Word, all those descriptions about that. So the cowcatcher is going to be the pre-existence of Jesus. The smokestack up at the top is going to be from birth to the first 12 years. And then there is a space between 12 years and his ministry, and that's the gap in between. And then the ministry of Jesus is going to start in the engineer's cab. Everybody okay so far?
No. In the engineers where?
Right here.
Ah.
Oh, sorry. This top part up here would be the engineer's cab, driver's cab, and so that's going to be the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. But here's what I want you to write down. This first line, everybody see this line right here? This first line, and let me not do it out of my head because I don't want to confuse anybody. The first line is going to be the Passover. So if you want to write above this, and I'll give you a printed sheet here in a second, but this very first vertical line inside the train is going to be the Passover. So, and then let's go ahead and do the second one. The second line above the cross is going to be the Feast of Tabernacles in October. And then the end line at the very end is going to be the Feast of Dedication, 25th of December. So do you see how they're trying to do the seasons of the year? And so when they talk about this, they're just going to do spring, summer, and fall. Winter's going to be kind of compressed within that. And so the events, as they try to work through them, are then going to run down this way. So all of the events under the smokestack are going to be from January until the Passover. Everybody follow what we're doing? And then the middle part is going to be from April down through October. So all of those are going to be that season of the year. And then from the Feast of Tabernacles to dedication, going into the winter, are going to be all of these here. Okay? Everybody kind of okay? Now, there's some discussion about this, and they're the first to say, and like, for example, I read an article today, and he pushes everything back 2 or 3 years, but let me go ahead and give you the ones that they're going to work with. The top square up here at the top, if you put over just on the outside, AD 26. Okay? Everybody see where it's at? Outside that top square is going to be AD 26. And then obviously when you come down, the first full line at the end is going to be AD 27. Everybody okay? And then the middle part is going to be AD 28. And then the last full line that goes across is going to be AD 29. And then the very bottom is going to be AD 30. Now, like I said, there's still continued discussion about the years. Some will, like one I read today, very, very thoughtful. He's going to have the crucifixion at 33, and he's going to have an additional Passover from the Synoptics, but this will at least be a working point. And as long as you know, there's still some discussion about that, but for our purposes, this will kind of help us to have a handle on that. Now, they didn't do it on this one, but let me just show you one other thing. If you would draw a dotted line through the first wheel, draw a dotted line through the first wheel, and when you get a train in a second, can you see this line just before the wheel? See that line right there? That's also going to be dotted, and this first wheel is actually going to be the last week of Jesus before he's crucified, and in time, technically it's going to go just right in here, but they just kept it here because there's so much stuff that happens and goes on. So when you see a full train in a second, there'll be a dotted line here, and your first wheel will have a dot in it, and in time-wise, it actually will slide inside that first box. Everybody kind of see what we're talking about before we get the full thing? And here's what's significant. And again, we've mentioned this on Sunday morning. The highest number of days, individual days that I have read that someone has found is 40. And most of them are 30 to 31 days is all that we have from the life of Jesus. If you can just count individual days. And what's amazing is that when John 1 goes through all these descriptions, King of Israel, Lamb of God, all these other things, before the turning of the water to wine, John gives us 7 days leading up to the first sign, and that's going to be 25% of the days that we have in his life. And so this is very, very selective. And I just typically ask people, if you're writing a biography of Winston Churchill, how are you going to do if you have 30 days of his life? Many other signs and wonders Jesus did in the presence of his disciples are not written. Here's the other thing. 30% of all that we know about the life of Jesus is during the last week. So when you get the full train and this dotted line, and this is going to be the last week, 30% of the life of Jesus is going to take place right here. Here's going to be the crucifixion, and then the last wheel is going to be the 40 days before he's raised again. Okay? Can you kind of see the structure of how it's put together? Now, if you look at the back just for a second, I first came across this in the summer of either 71 or 72, and originally Johnny Luker worked with Mama Sykes to do this, and they printed these out and having a printing press and everything, and these fabulous books, and she told me, she said, you got the last ones that we printed, and so and you don't have to decide tonight, this will give you a chance to kind of think about it. We have these in individual pages, and we can print off a set of these for you if you want one. I'm not going to push them on you. You can think about it, but as we go through, I find that this is the single most helpful thing that I use. Anytime I'm doing something from the Gospels, I always go to this, and I'll explain some more details about it. On the back of the train is just some descriptions. They finally put the thing online. And so if you will go to gardenofpraise.com, Harmony, 0, whatever, and check under Gospel Train, under Harmony of the Gospels, these people asked her if they could put it online. So it's online if you want to go check it out there. And that's the That's the place to go find it. And that just gives you access. You can look ahead and do some other things, but they finally put it online, and I think Mama Sykes is 92 or 93, and the last time I talked with her, she said, we have 112 on the ground and number 113 is in the oven. So if you start with 13 kids to begin with and you're 92, then she has 112 on the ground and number 113 is on the way. And like I said, she legitimately sings tenor, so all of her girls sing alto, all of the boys sing bass. And the Westview Boys Home would come sing Sunday night for church, and it was like the Vienna Boys Choir. All these boys whose voices hadn't changed sang soprano and tenor, and then her girls sang alto, and her boys sang bass. And they would sing after church, and Mama Sykes would sing tenor, legitimate tenor, while she was there. But a couple of times I've heard her talk to a little girl who's got 2 babies and is struggling to come to church. And she would say, "Now, honey, if you want to get to church, you can get there. I got 13 kids to church. And if you really want to, you can get these 2 kids to church." And so twice she had babies on Saturday afternoon. And she told the doctor, "I don't know what you're going to need to do, but I will be in the Lord's house tomorrow for church. So whatever you need to do to get me ready to go to church, the baby's here, we're both breathing, and I will be in the Lord's house tomorrow. And whatever you need to do to get me there, then we're going to do that." So just absolutely amazing family. We're going to do one more thing tonight, and then we'll be finished. This is the train with symbols on it, and you can see why I wanted you to kind of draw it initially, have a blank train. I first came across this from listening to boys from the boys' home and the Sykeses. They would sit around and talk about the events in the life of Jesus. Oh, that was the summer of 27. That was the fall of 28. And they had the whole life of Jesus memorized by season and by year. Now, what I want you to notice, and this didn't print on this one, I want you to look at the very bottom under the pre-existence. Do you see the triangle is miracles? A discourse, a sermon, is going to be a square. Everybody with me? Here at the very, very bottom of the left. And a parable is going to be a circle. Okay? So hang with me as we go through this. And these are all going to have zip codes. The pre-existence is going to be 0001, which tells you where you're going to find it at. Not in Matthew, not in Mark, not in Luke. It's going to be in John. So see if your zip code is like 5270, then it's going to be Matthew 5, Mark. And so there's actually zip codes that go with each one of these, so you can actually turn to the section where these events are taking place. So here's your cow catcher is pre-existence. Your smokestack is birth to 12 years. And then do you see right under the little boy who's 12, there's your Passover. Everybody see where that's at now? So there's your first line, and that's going to be the events about the Passover. And then just before the dove and the bread, that line is the tabernacle feast, the Feast of Tabernacles. Everybody with me there? And so you can see why I gave you the blank train first, so you can just kind of know where to follow that through. And then when you go to the engineer's cab at the top, then we're going to have the dove and the bread for the baptism, the temptation, and the calling of the first disciples. Then when you come to the spring of 27, everybody with me now? We're going to have Cana and Capernaum, and this is where the first miracle is going to take place. So there, see the triangle with the 1 in it? At the end of these, there's a list of all the miracles, all the parables, all the discourses in order. But on this train, you will be able to see where he taught, where he did parables, and where he did miracles. Guess what the first one is with the guy with the halo in the summer of 27?
Where he turns the tables.
overturning the money changers. So this is the first one in John 2. And then here's our first discourse. Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night. So you got the little man with the moon and the star. And see, this is done for 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds. So they can see and then hear the things that are going on. And what's the third one in the summer of 27? John goes to jail. Then he is well received in the fall of 27, and we're going to have the woman at the well. So we're going to have the second miracle take place. He's well received in Galilee, and then we're also going to have our second and third discourse. And then when we come to the spring of 28, he's rejected in Nazareth. The Galilean mission is going to take place in the Sermon on the Mount. And what I want you to notice is that the first parables do not begin until the spring of 28. Everybody see what I did with the 2 circles that are there? Underneath the word mount. Then we're going to have the Sermon on the Plain. And then here come miracles 8 through 11. And then discourses 6 through 10, 2 parables. And then when you come to the fall of 28, the little P's are parables around the Sea of Galilee. Matthew 13 gives 7 parables, and so we're going to have a whole group of parables that are given here in the fall of 28. Then when we come to the spring of 29, what you need to notice is that we're coming within a year of the crucifixion. So he sends the disciples out 2 by 2. The second rejection at Nazareth. And what's the next one? How long has John been in jail? Yeah. Are you the one to come, or shall we look for he hadn't been in there a couple of months. And visually you begin to see what begins to happen when you begin to look at that, and then you start reading the account and the events that took place. And so poor John goes to jail roughly in the summer of 27, and he's in jail for all the rest of that year, all of 28, and somewhere in the spring of 29, then he's finally beheaded. And that's a part of the legitimate question. If you're the Messiah, what am I doing here still in jail? I would never have seen this, but Leon Morris, who had taught John probably for 60 years, he just made this comment once. He said, there was every one of the miracles that a prophet did in the Old Testament, Jesus is going to do. But there is one miracle that Jesus does that no one else did in the Old Testament. And it's the giving of sight to the blind. And at least 3 times, I'm going to, rusty memory, I'm going to say Isaiah 29, Isaiah, I don't know if it's 45 or 47. When the Messiah comes, the dead are going to be raised, on and on. The blind are going to see. And the signature miracle of Jesus being the Son of God is the ability to give sight to the blind. Sir, are you the one to come, or shall we look for another? And he keeps right on going. And sorry, let me shake the chills down. You go tell John, the blind see, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is preached to the poor. He never answers the question directly, but knowing John knows his Old Testament, when they ask, are you the one to come? The first thing you need to tell John is, the blind see. And as the Gospel of John unfolds and we have these 7 signs, Each one of them gets more intense and more difficult to deny. But what is the sixth sign? The giving of sight to the blind man. And then the seventh sign is the raising of a 4-day-old dead man. And that was the testimony to John. Then the Sermon on the Bread of Life is going to be the summer of 29. Mount of Transfiguration. Let's build 3 shelters. See those there? Then the fall of 29 is unique to the Gospel of Luke. When we do zip codes, these events will be 0, 0, 10, 11, 12, or something 0. Only Luke tells us the events that take place in the fall of 79. It's the southern Perean ministry. He goes from Galilee, he crosses over the Jordan, he comes down. He actually goes back a little bit, and he comes to Jerusalem. None of the other Gospels tell us that, and that's only we get from John. The 70 are sent out. And then as we come to the spring of 30, then we're going to have the rich young ruler, the teaching about divorce, Zacchaeus. Now, everybody see what I was talking about? See the dotted line after Zacchaeus and the tree? Then when you come to the first wheel, the events inside the first wheel are going to slide time-wise into that first square. Everybody understand what I'm trying to say by that? Just in terms of the chronology, because he is going to be killed on the eve of Passover. And so that's where that Passover date goes all the way down. And the events inside this first wheel are 30% of the events in the 4 Gospels. So the largest amount of detail in the life of Jesus is actually inside that wheel. Then we have the cross, and then the last 40 days. Wayne, from a teaching point of view, isn't this just fantastic?
You can see it.
You can see, that's what I'm saying. It's written for 8
I
and
don't
2.
know why you're talking to him. I'm the one that teaches this in first grade.
And that's part of why I wanted you to draw something by only hearing it. You know, some of you did really well, by the way. If I was doing it for 4 years, I did a class a mile from the Harbor Bridge with commercial artists. They were on billboards, magazines. I mean, they were just fantastic. And I would have to write under stick figures. So they would just die laughing. The stand-up comedy was anytime you try to illustrate something before commercial artists, they would just howl because I don't have very good eye and hand coordination. If I only heard what to do, it's harder to do it. But once you can see the framework, and then once you can see, here's the feasts, so here's our time frames. And so with the feast, we're going to then collapse it into 3 seasons. The summer is going to be the largest, and then we're going to do the years on the side. Then that kind of gives you the sense of the chronology. Now, we're going to do one last thing before we leave. On the back of this is a sample, and as you go through the events, if you look at this on the train, this is going to be the summer of 28. Everybody see the dark part? Okay. Mama Sykes actually went to a printer and had him just to do a small train, and she would ink it, and then she would color in the seasons. So as she goes through her Gospels, she knows the season and the year where each of the events are taking place that are out in the margin of her Bible. But this is a sample. This happens, every one of these have this page. So on the left hand, on the top right hand, here's the visuals, Sermon on the Plain, ordaining the apostles, and then here are a list of all the events that take place the summer of 28. So see the crippled healed, the zip code would be 005. Then, and if it's a square, what is it? From the very bottom. If you look at the very bottom, I'm sorry, I said wrong. If it's a triangle, it's going to be a miracle. Then we're going to have 2 discourses. One's going to be in John, and then the other's going to be in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Then we're going to have another miracle, another discourse, and then we're going to have a parable. And then we're going to have these 2 miracles, another discourse, number 10 discourse, and the 8th parable. And so with each one of these squares, there is, and as you get more material, like the last week is going to have at least 2 pages, but they will list all of the verses of the events that take place during that season and that time of year. Then, on the very bottom, they give you a map of where Jesus went during that particular time. And so you can see it starts with him coming to Jerusalem, and then on the right-hand side, here are the travels. Oh, he's going to come to Jerusalem for the Passover. 2, the Pool of Bethsaida. And so the travels are going to be given a breakdown, and the numbers on the map are going to be given to you on the right-hand side, so you can actually visually see where Jesus travels and what he does during that time. And this is just a sample, but I wanted to give you at least one to look at to say, okay, when you come to this side, every one of these have one of these that goes with it. And when you get to the last week, because there's so many events, it's going to come over to 2 pages, but just for a sample tonight, then I wanted you to see that when you come to each of the squares in each of the events, then they will give you a list. Here's the things that happen. Here are the miracles. Here are the discourses. Here are the parables. And then here's the travels, and here's the journey of where Jesus went. I just never get tired of doing this from the point of view, and they'll be the first to say, this isn't inspired. But I just promise you, most of us have no idea either the season or the time of the year when things happen. And so you can begin to see over and over and again, I don't care what it is, if I'm given an assignment or I'm teaching from a specific text, then I'll go through and then want to find, okay, where's this at on the train? And then on the very back, there will be a list, as I said. Here are all the miracles in the order when they take place with the zip code for them. Here are all the parables. Here are all the discourses. And that way, every time I do a lesson contextually from the Gospels, then I have some context of the season of the year, the time, let's say with season first, the season, and then potentially the year that it took place. And then in terms of context, then I can also see here are the other events that take place that surround and give context either to this parable or to this discourse. So, like I said, we'll wait till next week. If you would like to get a copy, we're more than glad to do that. I'm not pushing them on you. Encourage you to look at the website and see if you can track that down. And like I said, it's this Garden of Praise is something totally different. But I assume they came to Mama Sykes and said, could we include this on your thing? And that's what she told me. She said, we had a printing press in Hollis, and so they did thousands of these, and I got the last ones that were there. And if you want one, we're happy to run copies of these off for you, and we'll give them to you later.
Any idea how many years she worked on that till she was done? Or did she never finish?
Well, she would still be working on it, and she has a book called Doodles, and all through her Bible, she has a wide margin, and she can walk children completely through her Bible with the pictures that she's doodled in the margin. And like I said, she got a train from a printer, stuck it in, and as she reads through her Gospels, because see, they're going to include different parts. All but 4 paragraphs of Mark are in Matthew and Luke, which is just absolutely amazing. And then if you have details of events, Mark actually gives you more details than the others because they have more parables and more teaching. So Mark has more narrative, and then the others have Sermon on the Mount, the teaching, more parables. and yet there's 3 of them, and they tell the same story, and then you come along, and John tells the same story and only covers 7% of the same material. But if we didn't have the feasts in John, we would have no idea of the years, because the others just tell one kind of singular journey and end up in Jerusalem and he's crucified. And so it's because of John then that we have the feast, and we have some detail about that. So, like I said, we'll do, Lord willing, we'll do next week, and then we'll be off for a week. And so what I propose to do is then just to start working our way through, and we'll give you some of these. And so we'll walk through this, but anticipate the last week is going to be 30%. So we're going to save more time for that. But there's, like I said, more details are given of that last week than anything else, so we'll have a little more time for that. But what I'm wanting to do, and my objective for this, is for you to have a visual picture of the life of Jesus in terms of the years and the seasons when the events take place. And because, like I said, I started this in 72, I've never read my Gospels quite the same since then, because for the first time I had some perspective of year and season. Very good.